Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Johnson edition. We turned out a poem 293, I Got So I Could Take His Name. We will finish this poem with the word misery. We are back again to the challenges of sometimes reading Emily's poetry. It almost seems too personal for us. We're almost like voyeurs looking into her life. Now, who the his is in his name of this poem is up for debate. I mean, many will say that, in fact, this is a poem referring to Reverend Charles Wadsworth, the Philadelphia clergyman that she met in 1855 and had a possible relationship with, or she longed for a relationship which never was in any way consummated, and that led to this pain, this suffering that she will be talking about. Many have seen this as another theodicy. Why must there be pain and suffering in the world? The fifth of our big five, as we reference it. Our assumption, speaking of the big five, is that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist. And I am hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments where we do talk about the big five, of course, epistemology, ontology, psychology, sociology, and then finally that fifth, the question of pain and suffering in the world, the question of theodicy, which of course Emily knew well from her study of Milton. I'm also hopeful that you've read the preceding 292 poems. We just finished with 292, If Your Nerve Deny You. And if you have done that reading, then you place this poem in the center of a universe of other kinds of poems where the same kind of sentiments will be played out. That is to say, why must there be sorrow? Why must there be rejection? Why must I lose a person out of my life? That it's taking me a long time to be able to even just hear his name mentioned without it crushing me. Notice the repetition in the three stanzas of I got so I could over and over again. And in the fourth stanza, just simply abbreviated to could. Also, hear the power of the words in the imperfect rhymes. This is one more of those lamentation poems, we might call it. Of course, Emily knew the book of Lamentations in her Bible. And here, this is a poem that will struggle, lament the loss, the misery, as she'll finish the poem. I got so I could take his name without tremendous gain, that stop sensation on my soul and thunder in the room. I got so I could walk across that angle in the floor where he turned so and I turned how, and all our sinew tore. I got so I could stir the box in which his letters grew without that forcing in my breath as staples driven through. Could dimly recollect a grace, I think they call it God, renowned to ease extremity when formula had failed, and shape my hands petition's way, though ignorant of a word that ordination utters. My business with the cloud, if any power behind it be, not subject to despair, it care in some remoter way, for so minute affair is misery itself too vast for interpreting more. For interrupting more. This last word, interrupting, is, I think, the key word of the poem, because this is a poem about being interrupted. In other words, her life going along, and then all of a sudden she finds this individual. Here it is, he, and she says, I got to where finally I could hear his name again. Again, who is this he? We would love to know. Some have speculated it's Wadsworth. She says, I got so I could take his name, as in hear his name, without tremendous gain, that stop sensation on my soul, the thunder, she says, in the room. Obviously the hyperbole, the exaggeration here is remarkable, and yet she says it. I got to where finally, when I heard his name, it didn't just like thunder going off. She said, this is brilliant, I got so I could walk across that angle in the floor. Her poetic eye is, guys, isn't it amazing? I mean, she says, I remember where he was standing in the angle of the floor, maybe the light or something like that, where he turned so and I turned, how, and then she'll say it, all our sinew tore. She'll use this word sinew, 6 other poems. It's like a ripping apart. And then finally to the third I got so I could stir the box. There's been much debate about this box that contains all the letters that Emily would have received from whoever it is she's talking about, in which his letters grew. Emily was a great letter writer and a great letter receiver. It's one of the true tragedies of Emily Dickinson scholarship that we don't have all the letters that Emily both wrote and received. If we did, there's so much of these poems we could be helped to interpret. She says, I got so I could stir the box in which his letters grew. Notice the brilliance of the word stir, by the way. Stirring up emotion and the like, and physically stirring the letters in the box. Without that forcing in my breath, we're back to the tremendous and the stopping sensation of the thunder, right? And we're back to the sinews tearing here. She says it, without the forcing in my breath, as staples driven through. When we get to poem 512, we'll come back to play along with this notion of staples. The soul has bandaged moments when, too appalled to stir, she feels some ghastly fright come up and stop to look at her, salute her with long fingers, caress her freezing hair, sip goblin from the very lips the lover hovered o'er, unworthy that a thought so mean accost a theme so fair. The soul has moments of escape, when bursting all the doors she dances like a bomb abroad and swings upon the hours, as do the bee, delirious born, long dungeoned from his rose, touch liberty, then know no more, but noon in paradise. The soul's retaken moments, when felon led along, with shackles on his plumed feet and staples in the song, the horror welcomes her again. These are not braid of tongue. This idea of staples obviously takes us to Christ and the nails on the cross, driven as well through Christ's hands and feet. And then instead of I got so I could, it's just simply could, I got so I could, but here it's just abbreviated, truncated, could dimly recollect a grace. Now, I'm going to make the argument that standing behind this poem possibly is the reading of Wordsworth's classic lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey. You'll remember from our study at learnstrong.net, you can run to ground our study of this poem, but you'll remember recognition's dim and faint, and somewhat of a sad perplexity revives the picture of the mind again. This idea could dimly recollect a grace, capitalized. We're going to get to God in the next line. I think they call it God. Again, the ironic twist when she says things like this. Who is the they? Well, religious people. You mean clergymen like clergy Wadsworth? Right? I think they call it God. Later it will be if any power. Renowned to ease extremity. We'll go back to our poem. Hope is the thing with feathers, never an extremity. It asked her crumb of me. When formula had failed, and there it is, right? We will end with interrupting, and this idea of the formula. There are things that help us get through the pain and suffering of our life, and she'll call those religious observations formula, and then it becomes prayer. Shape my hands, petitions weigh, asking for help, though ignorant of a word that ordination utters. And of course here, ordained, we think of clergyman Wadsworth. There's a number of reasons why people have imagined it's Charles Wadsworth that's being referenced here. Then she'll say, my business, notice it's back to economic language. We've seen this in other poems. With the cloud, go back to poem 273. If, we're back to this thing about they call it God, if any power behind it be. In other words, losing this relationship has led her to a certain kind of agnosticism. I don't think atheism, but certainly agnosticism. If any power behind it be, not subject to despair. We're going to go from despair to misery. It care in some remoter way. You'll remember again back to Tintern Abbey, had no need by remoter charm by thought supplied, unborrowed from the eye. And care in some remoter way for so minute affair. In other words, God doesn't think anything about the kind of pain that I'm going through. Is misery itself too vast for interrupting more. She is calling, of course, God to her aid, but there's these speculations of ifs, right? if, for example, there's a power behind the cloud, if it is not subject to despair, if it cares for such a small thing as human misery, and of course, finally, if it is not too vast to be interrupted by requests from her. And the fact that the word more is the last word of this poem, dash, more, dash, right, the way it's said, suggests that she's not getting over this so easily, even though she says, I finally am getting better at this. By the way, her use of the word misery is fascinating. She uses it in 10 total poems. When we get to poem 376, we're gonna come back to this poem. It reads like this: of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, give me my reason, life I had not had, but for yourself. 'Twere better charity to leave me in the Adam's tomb, merry and naught and gay and numb, than this smart misery. Or when we get to 462, we'll for sure come back to this one. It reads like this: why make it doubt? It hurts it so sick to guess, so strong to know, so brave upon its little bed to tell the very last they said unto itself, and smile and shake, for that dear, distant, dangerous sake. But instead, the pinching fear that something it did do or dare offend the vision, and it flee, and they no more remember me, nor ever turn to tell me why. Oh, Master, this is misery. Well, I think at 2a, the primary message here is, of course, the loss of a pal is unbelievably painful. It's miserable, can we say it that way? At 2b, the language of this poem, the hyperbole of this poem, I think, in the construction, obviously, with I could, and then finally could. At 3, I mentioned Tintern Abbey, and I think, you know, that poem, 1798, is a publishing date here, this poem, 1861. I think it's altogether possible that Emily has dealt with the lines composed a few miles above Tintern Abbey, and so I dare to hope, though change no doubt from what I was when first I came among these hills. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. I think it reads rather nicely for this poem. Finally, at 3b, to own a poem like this, what was a time when you struggled with misery and you wanted to pray, but for some reason it just didn't seem to work? I hope Emily's challenging you. Thank you.